Hello, my name is Kevin F.J. Harris, and I'm the author of Crusade of the Sword, and I wanted to go through how this all came into being. So let's get started. In late 2010, the story came to be. Essentially, I was just kind of writing down some ideas for stories, and one kind of popped out at me. And I decided to take it and see if I could actually write it and make it into something greater than it was at the time. So let's take a look at what happened in 2010. So this is the manuscript for the start of the book. Back then it was called The Elves of Endalia, and book one was going to be called Unity of the Five. This book contained the introduction or the prologue to the story. Now, there are some names in here. If you've actually read my first book, second book, whatever, you know that there are Temparis and Zerenthrix. Those are two of the big characters. But who's this Neytiri character? Neytiri actually got replaced with the name Almathara later on. And this is the beginning of how everything came to be. This was essentially the very beginning of the story, and you can see the interactions going on. Now, the other thing is, in this prologue, Zerenthrix and Neytiri are brother and sister, where in Crusade of the Sword, they're lovers. So, big differences here. And this was the creation of the Land of Mail in this part of the story. I also began sketching out an enormous number of maps of what does the land look like? What is it called? What are the places called? And things like that. Now you notice in the map here, move my arrow up here, there's a few differences than what are actually ended up being done. So the places for the elves are pretty much in the right place. However, there is a missing town over here. Linny was supposed to be up here, and Linny ended up being put in there later on. So, but everything here is pretty much as I intended it, and so that was that. Up here in the upper left is a close-up of what the different elven clan zones are. So you have Weeva or Weave that got removed from the final map because you don't see it over here. Weeva is where the half-elves live. Ishal is the zone that is called, that is where the city of Ishalor is located. Urshalar is where the city of Ursha is. You can see that here. That's the River Clan. Eldadri was supposed to be a major capital. That's why, in the same thing with here, these larger circles are supposed to represent large capitals. The Ursha was supposed to be just a little tiny, dinky little village, but it turned out not to be in the final story. All of them are major capitals. And then Ishk, ultimately I got rid of that and also got rid of the Elda, but the thing here, Ishk, is where Ishk Aldu is, the Mistborn clan, lives up there. So these are the maps that I drew. This N is not in the correct orientation, nor is this one. North is actually straight up. But there you go. Let's move on. And then this is a drawing I did of Hada, the Isle of Hada. Some people would call it Hade, but it's actually Hada. And so you can see here the volcano, the ashen wastes, this little beach called Dark Beach, Thrix Pass, which is like a passageway to go up there. This winding thing called Serpent River, which is all lava, molten magma. The Shattered Lands, Lake Neytiri. You can see that Basically, I used the Neytiri name for that, but ultimately Neytiri was replaced with Almathara, but that never got changed. Things like that. There's also the Isle of Exiles over here, and you can see this little town here called Jix. That is where the orcs live, and you actually see that in the first book, or I actually talk about it. That's where Siligar is transformed into the leader of the Ashen. Then I started making vector maps of what that area looked like. So you have Ursha, Ishalor, the Eldridri. This is actually the Wood Clan, Eldridri, Ishka Aldu. And it's a little more refined, a little more things. But I hate this map. I just can't stand it. I don't know why I used these little curly cues for the woods and stuff, or the trees. That just does not look good at all. I'll let your imaginations fly with that one. So ultimately, and this is the main hero graphic that I created for the Elves of Endalia, and it looks very much like what the first book of Crusade of the Sword looks like, in a way. So once I was done with that, I created a teaser video.
For 2,000 years, the elven races have been at war. Of the 7 elven tribes, only 5 remain. But whispers of a darkness to the south have hastened thoughts of peace and unity. Only time will tell if peace can be realized, before the elven races become extinct from their hatred. Coming soon, a novel trilogy from author Kevin Harris. The elves of Endalia will soon begin the quest to save their people, their way of life, and their world.
Okay, so obviously it didn't come out in 2012 as I planned, because, I just never got around to it. I kind of just set it aside and didn't bother picking it up again. But one thing I did do, other than a teaser video, was to create a soundtrack. And here you go. So, and then everything stopped. So once I had done all that work, it just kind of like fell under the bus, on the back burner, whatever you want to call it, and it completely was forgotten. And that was in early 2011. Fast forward now to 2021. While I was cleaning out some files on my computer, I happened to come across the folder containing all of the information, all of the sketches, all the text documents, everything referring to the Elves of Endalia and Crusade of the Sword. I ultimately would rename it to Crusade of the Sword just before I kind of tossed it to the side and forgot about it. And then I decided in 2021, when I found those files, I want to roll with this. This story was a great story. I think it could be amazing. I think I'm going to roll with it. So what happened? So it started off with a lot of lore work, making the lore of the world, the languages, who are these people? Who are the creatures? What are they like? What do they look like? What do they talk like? Things like that. What are their traditions? And also creating new sketches and redesigning the maps, because my design skills had grown by leaps and bounds by that time. So it took 4 months to do all this work before I wrote a single line of the story. So here I had compiled all the lore into my Notes app, which is, of course, Apple Notes. And you can see all of these categories: the traditions and languages, the unseen, the Havorian conclave, the elven clans, this card game which will be introduced in book 3, the races of Sauron, races of Mael, races of Astari, places in the world, other races, maps, groups, and the creatures of Almathara. It basically, I covered every single nook and cranny that I could cover. And you can see in here, the Dwarves of Enval. It outlines the characters and who they are, and describes these people, who they are, and where they live. Next was the sketches. These are all the sketches. So this is Siligar. This is the Perseverance. This is all from book 1. This is Ishkaldu, where our story begins. This is Snowappa, the big snow troll that ended up getting wrecked in his particulars. And then and then Dezo, the Flirav, and Rafasa, the city of the Magi. All of this is from book 1. And then the revised maps. These maps look 10 million times better. I drew every detail by hand, placed every one of these trees by hand. This map here alone took over 4 hours to create. And then the world map. I wanted a map of the whole world, which I did not create back in 2010, 2011. And so here, for the first time, I created this world map. So you have Astari, you have Sauron, you have Pilara, which will be introduced in book 3. You have Fiswa, the Telesian Isles, and all of this kind of stuff. This map took 6 days to complete. Every mountain here you see, I drew by hand. Every mountain, drew, the outline and the shadows and stuff were all done by hand in Adobe Illustrator. This is a 100% vector map. I could take this and print out a ginormous poster out of this, which I intend to do someday. So that's that. And then I started working on the outline for book 1. What happens? These are all the things that happen. Linari telling Alathus the Ba'alathisit, which is how the world came into being, the creation story. All these different events that occur and how this all happens is done in the outline. You have to build an outline before you write the book, because if you don't, you have no kind of map to follow. So the outline is like a map. It's guiding you through what goes on and when. It's a timeline of sorts. This was done in October of 2021, but then in November, I actually started writing the story, and you could see the chapters all laid out here. This is all after the fact, after the book was finished, this screenshot. I wrote all of this in an app called Ulysses. It is an amazing app for writers. If you're interested in writing a book, I highly recommend you look into Ulysses. Both books 1 and 2 and 3 are all done in Ulysses. Once the manuscript was done, it was time to start designing the cover. I started doing that in December of 2021. And once that cover design was done, it was ready we were ready to roll. So you can see here, I started creating the sword here. I wanted to make a sword that looks like it's fragmenting, like it's falling apart, like pieces and polygons are coming off of it, and little particles are coming off of it, because that's what this whole thing's about. It's about a broken sword. So then after this, we have the layout of the book. So this was done in Adobe InDesign. And as you can see, this is the first chapter. adding all the little ornamentations, all the typography, and everything else. Doing that and laying out the book so that it can be printed. And then in March of 2022, book 1 was released. And it was a great moment for me. It was an amazing moment for me because this story I have been wanting to tell for over 10 years was finally in print, and other people could read it and get to experience it. And then beyond. Of course, I worked on book 2. Book 2 was launched on March 19th, 2024, my birthday. And then book 3, God willing, will launch in March of 2026. I'm actively working on book 3 right now. It could come out earlier, but I'm really shooting for March 2026 just as a reasonable goal. And so the trilogy will come into being then in 2026. All 3 books will be together. League of the Sword, Ascension of Twilight, and Tears of the Titans. Tears of the Titans is already shaping up to be probably the best of the 3. It's the grand finale. So that's what they're going to look like, and that's what it's all going to be. It's going to be an amazing trilogy and I'm going to be very happy to have completed it. But there's one more thing I want to talk about. In book 2, I wrote a very, very graphic sex scene. Like really graphic. Almost pornographic, you could say. Lots of detail. And as I was writing book 2, and I realized that, I want everyone to be able to read this book. I don't want somebody who's, say, a Christian, like I am, to come across this sex scene and suddenly have a problem. And it was definitely not something I wanted anyone younger to read either. So I cut that scene out of the book and replaced it with just an innocent, intimate moment between Nolthar and Alethis that was innocent and would be fine for anybody of any age to read. This cut sex scene, and I'm not showing all of it here for obvious reasons. This is just the first bit of it, which does not include any of the actual sex scene. We see that they're getting to get intimate down here at the bottom, and then that is it. After that, that's where things just went absolutely south. This cut sex scene has been set aside, and I don't think I'm going to use it ever. But I'm going to hold on to it because it's part of the history of this trilogy. And that's it. I appreciate you watching, and I hope you enjoyed this look into how Crusade of the Sword came into being. Thanks.